You know, there's something they don't tell you about getting older. It's not the wrinkles or the aches, it's the quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in when the phone stops ringing as often, when the kids are busy with their own lives, when friends you used to see every week suddenly feel far away. If you've ever sat in that silence and felt loneliness creeping in, I want you to know something important. You're not alone in feeling alone. Research shows that the loneliest age for most people isn't in their 20s or 30s. It's between 65 and 75. That's right, what should be our golden years can sometimes feel more like empty years. But here's the good news: loneliness isn't inevitable. With a few simple shifts in how we think and act, we can fill our lives with meaningful connections at any age. In this video, we'll talk about why this happens and, more importantly, how to turn things around. We'll cover everything from rebuilding old friendships to creating new social circles that truly understand this chapter of life. So let's start with the first and most important realization. Loneliness isn't about how many people are around you, it's about connection. You could be at a crowded family gathering and still feel lonely if the conversations stay surface level. On the flip side, you might have just one or two close friends who truly get you, and that's enough to feel deeply connected. The key is quality, not quantity. This is especially important to remember if you've lost a spouse or close friends over the years. That kind of loneliness cuts deep, but it doesn't have to be permanent. Start small. Reach out to someone you've been thinking about but haven't spoken to in a while. Not with a text or email, but with an actual phone call. There's something magical about hearing a familiar voice that can instantly make the world feel less lonely. Now, let's talk about something that keeps many seniors stuck in loneliness: waiting for others to make the first move. We often fall into the trap of thinking, if they cared, they'd call. But here's what I've learned after talking to hundreds of seniors. Almost everyone is thinking the same thing. Your old friend from work might be sitting at home right now, wishing someone would reach out to them too. That's why one of the most powerful things you can do is become the person who initiates. Invite a neighbor for coffee. Organize a monthly lunch with former colleagues. Start a small book club with just 2 or 3 people. You don't need to plan big gatherings. Small, consistent connections often mean the most. I'll never forget Martha, a 72-year-old viewer who told me she felt invisible until she started greeting every cashier and barista by name. What began as small talk led to real friendships. Now her local coffee shop feels like a second home where everyone knows her order and asks about her grandkids. This brings us to our third point: finding your people. As we age, our social needs change. The friends we partied with in our 40s might not be the ones we need in our 70s. That's okay. This is the perfect time to seek out people who share your current interests, whether that's bird watching, painting, or discussing classic films. Senior centers aren't what they used to be. Many now offer everything from Tai Chi to tech classes to hiking groups. And if going somewhere new feels intimidating, remember, everyone there is hopping to make connections too. You're not the new person, you're just a friend they haven't met yet. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. It's not that simple. Maybe mobility issues or transportation make getting out difficult. Maybe you've tried reaching out before and it didn't work. That's why in our next part, we'll talk about overcoming these very real obstacles, because everyone deserves companionship, no matter their circumstances. The truth is, your best connections might be waiting where you least expect them. But first, we need to talk about the invisible walls we build without realizing it, and how to start taking them down, one brick at a time. You know, one of the biggest myths about loneliness is that it's just about not having enough people around. But the truth is much more complicated, and in some ways, much more hopeful. Because what if I told you that some of the loneliness you're feeling might actually come from within, not because there's anything wrong with you, but because we all develop invisible habits and thought patterns over the years that can unintentionally push people away. Let me explain what I mean. Have you ever found yourself saying things like, "Nobody wants to hear my old stories," or "I don't want to be a burden"? These thoughts, as understandable as they are, create walls between us and the connections we crave. The first step to breaking them down is recognizing that your stories, your presence, they matter more than you realize. Take my friend George, for example. At 68, he'd convinced himself his grandchildren weren't interested in his military service stories. Then one day, his 12-year-old grandson asked about his medals. Turns out the boy had been too shy to ask before. Now they video call every Sunday while George shares pieces of his history. That connection didn't happen despite George's age. It happened because of it. This brings me to our next important point. Technology as a bridge, not a barrier. I know many of you feel left behind by all these new gadgets and apps, but here's something wonderful. Technology today is actually designed with seniors in mind more than ever before. Simple tablets with large icons, phones with emergency buttons, video call systems that grandchildren can set up with one click. You don't need to master every feature. Learning just one or two can open up new worlds. Video calls to see faraway loved ones' faces, Facebook groups for your hobbies. There are thriving communities for everything from knitting to classic cars. Free online classes where you can learn alongside people your age. And if technology feels overwhelming, that's okay. Libraries and senior centers often offer free tutoring, usually by patient teenagers who'd love to help. Now let's talk about something equally important, redefining what connection looks like. We often limit ourselves by thinking friendship has to look like it did in our 30s, dinner parties and long visits. But meaningful connection comes in many forms. The mail carrier who always stops to chat, the neighbor you exchange garden tips with over the fence, the online friend you've never met but share daily jokes with. Even small, consistent interactions can weave a safety net of connection that keeps loneliness at bay. My viewer Alina, at 79, started baking extra banana bread each week, one loaf for herself, one to give away. That simple act led to more conversations in her apartment building than she'd had in years. This leads perfectly into our next point, the power of purpose. Nothing fights loneliness like feeling needed. And here's the beautiful truth: you have so much to offer that the world desperately needs. Your wisdom, your skills, your simple presence. Consider volunteering at a local school. Many need grandparents for the day programs, teaching a skill at the community center, from woodworking to pie making, fostering a rescue pet. Many shelters need temporary homes for older animals. When we focus on what we can give rather than what we're missing, something magical happens. We become magnets for meaningful connection. Now I know some of you are thinking, but what if I've tried these things and still feel alone? That's why in our final part, we'll tackle the deepest layers of loneliness, the kind that lingers even when you're technically doing everything right. Because everyone deserves to feel truly seen and valued, and there are paths to get there that might surprise you. The truth is, your best years of connection might still be ahead, not in spite of your age, but because of the unique gifts and perspective only you can offer at this stage of life, and that's worth exploring further. There's a special kind of loneliness that can sneak up on us in our later years, one that has nothing to do with how many people are in our lives, and everything to do with feeling truly understood. You could be surrounded by loving family and still feel this ache, because what you're really missing are people who remember the world as you do, who share your history, who speak the same emotional language. This brings me to perhaps the most powerful antidote to senior loneliness, finding your generation. There's something profoundly comforting about spending time with people who grew up in the same era, who remember the same songs, the same historical moments, the same cultural touchstones. These connections create an instant sense of belonging that newer friendships often can't replicate. Consider joining a nostalgia group. Many communities have clubs for veterans, former teachers, or even just people who want to reminisce about the 1950s and 60s. Or start simple. Play music from your youth while doing chores and notice how it lifts your spirits. There's scientific proof that familiar music from our younger years can reduce stress and spark memories worth sharing. Now let's address the elephant in the room, loss. By this stage of life, most of us have said painful goodbyes to spouses, siblings, lifelong friends. This kind of loss leaves a unique void because these were the people who held our stories, who remembered us when. The grief can feel isolating, but it doesn't have to be. Here's a beautiful way to honor those relationships while creating new ones. Become a storyteller. Share your memories at a local history project. Write letters to grandchildren about the way things were, or volunteer to chat with nursing home residents who understand exactly what you've experienced. In giving your stories, you'll often receive others in return, and that exchange can be incredibly healing. For those dealing with mobility limitations or health issues that make getting out difficult, don't underestimate the power of microconnections. These are tiny moments of contact that add up. A daily phone call to a friend just to say good morning, watching the same TV show as a faraway relative and calling to discuss it, waving to neighbors from your porch or window, joining a telephone book club. Many libraries offer these. These small interactions create rhythm and expectation in your days, both powerful antidotes to loneliness. Now I want to share something important I've learned from hundreds of conversations with seniors. The people who cope best with loneliness aren't those with the most friends, they're those who have learned to be comfortable with themselves. There's a quiet art to enjoying your own company, to sitting with memories, observing nature, or simply being present. This isn't about giving up on connection, but about finding wholeness within yourself that makes the connections you do have even richer. As we wrap up, let me leave you with this thought. Loneliness isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility to address. And the beautiful truth is that at this stage of life, you get to design exactly the kinds of relationships you want. No more obligatory gatherings, no more pretending, just real, meaningful connections on your terms. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear in the comments, what's one small way you'll reach out this week? Maybe it's calling an old friend, smiling at a stranger at the grocery store, or finally joining that senior center painting class. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more conversations about thriving in your later years. Remember, the world still needs exactly what only you can offer: your stories, your laughter, your hard-won wisdom. Here's to filling your days with the kind of connections that make your heart feel light.